Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's a new Superman movie. So in preparation for Superman, which will be coming out on July 11th of this year, I will be looking back on all the previous Superman movies that we've gotten and giving you my opinions. Starting with, of course, Superman, the movie. So, let's get into it. Obviously, this movie is one of the best movies of all time. Superman is a huge classic and is just a great and very actionful and awesome superhero. So this movie was awesome for its time, especially with the effects like Superman flying. So that's what we're going to talk about first, the effects, because boy oh boy, there was many effects here, especially when it came to Superman flying. Superman flying in this movie, every time you see it, it looks as realistic as it can for the time period that this movie came out, which was 1978. For this time period, for the time period of the 1970s, this is revolutionary and looks amazing, Superman flying. Now, of course, really effects-wise, that's really all we get is just Superman flying, but it's really all we need to just show how good these effects were back then. Of course, they've gotten better over time, but you cannot forget how good they once were. And at the time, this was the best thing that people who loved Superman got from the comics. So the effects in this movie were amazing. And basically the neighbor of the effects is the set designers. Now the sets in this movie were just flawless, honestly. Between Superman's planet, with it all being diamondful and colorful, between Superman's parents' suits and the suits of his kind, were just awesome to see. And red is my favorite color, so just to see their suits be all red while they were unfortunately all getting killed by the sun and basically getting engulfed. But yeah, the suits in this movie were great, honestly. And this not only primarily is about what Superman's parents were wearing, this is about what Superman was wearing himself, this spandex. It looks very, very comic book accurate, of course, and they are bringing back this look for the new James Gunn adaptation, and throughout the trailers, we have seen it plenty of times, and it looks amazing. And I'm honestly very excited to see it on the big screen again. But sticking to this movie's Superman suit, it is phenomenal. It's very, very colorful, bright, and vibrant, and just the costume designers to really just give themselves a pat on the back. They did an amazing job with these costumes. Every character had their own wardrobe and design with their suits and costumes, and it looked amazing. So now I want to talk about one of my favorite aspects of this entire movie, the story. The story from start to finish is the most entertaining thing I've watched in a long time. It is very entertaining, especially considering you're watching a Superman movie. At times, it does feel like you're not watching a Superman movie and you're just watching a random man live a normal life at like basically the Bulletin where they just cover stories. But then you get little hints and reminders of the fact that you're in a Superman movie, you're watching Superman, you're watching Superman's alter ego, Clark Kent, just live a normal life, because there is parts of this movie where you do get to see a mix of them. Like one second you see Clark Kent, the next when Lois is hanging off of a helicopter off of the building, then you see Clark Kent turn into Superman and save her, which phenomenal scene, by the way. And that cues basically a montage of Superman busting a bunch of villains and doing a bunch of cool things. Like there was this one where he stops a bunch of robbers on a boat, and then what he does is he puts them all on the boat and then drags the boat back to the city and just puts the big ass boat in the middle of the freaking street right next to the police. Like scenes like that were just very entertaining and made this movie so great and so classic, because Superman's just casually showing off his super strength, freaking moving an entire boat or an entire ship. Either is a very impressive feat for Superman, but still, a great thing about this story is you get to see a lot of Superman. You know, for the first 50 minutes of this movie, you don't get any Superman. It's Clark Kent's, aka Kal-El's, backstory. It's about his parents, it's about his planet being destroyed and him losing his home and real family, and then basically in this spiked meteor ball gets tossed down to Earth and is picked up by his adoptive father, Glenn Ford, and his adoptive mother, Martha Kent, which two very good characters. It was very sad to see Glenn Ford's character die. When he had that heart attack or that stroke, I did not expect him to die there, because this was my first time watching the Superman movie. Like, I've always wanted to watch the Superman movies, and especially with this new one coming out, that gave me all the more reason to watch this movie and to watch this franchise franchise because I was really excited for that movie and I had to do a review for these movies. So it gave me a reason, and I'm glad I watched this movie, and I'm glad I'm watching this franchise because these characters are just so interesting to see on screen. And yes, Glenn Ford, who played Jonathan Kent, his death was very sad and kind of was shocking because, I mean, of course it's always in the Superman lore that his adoptive father does die, but I did not expect him to go out like that, just like a heart attack or a stroke randomly, but it was meant for a shocking moment, and it changed the story basically, because then that caused him to go find out who he really was, and that turned him into Superman. So I remember when he was basically in this ice castle and he just transformed after having like a quick little message from his biological father. So the story in this movie just overall is great. The action is there. There's really no comedy, but honestly, you really don't want comedy with these types of movies. They're serious, not jokey. And I don't like superhero movies when they're jokey. It really just makes it bad. It makes it silly. You have, like, for example, Thor Love and Thunder. That was a silly movie and that wasn't well received. And even in the later movies, like 4 and 5, I've heard that or 3 and 4 or whatever, I get them mixed up, but I've heard that there's comedic problems and it's a little goofy for a Superman movie. And that does scare me because, we want serious superheroes here. But of course, back to the review, back to the story, it's still a great story nonetheless, without the comedy. And I love serious movies. But yeah, the story just overall is great. It has everything that it needs to have for it to be a great, strong superhero movie, especially for a legendary superhero like Superman. But now I want to talk about the infamous villain of Superman, Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor was played by Gene Hackman, and Hackman did do a good job as Luthor, but there was only one problem. I didn't really feel like Lex Luthor was as big of a threat as I thought he'd be in the movie. Now, obviously, all the bad things that happened towards the end, like basically parts of the earth splitting in half and Lois almost dying, those were really bad things, but he didn't really physically challenge Superman. Like, he didn't build a suit and try to fight Superman. No, all he did was just make a chain necklace with kryptonite on it, which did basically stop Superman for a little while, but it didn't do any long-term damage. Literally, as soon as the necklace was taken off of him, he was back to his normal self, and he basically fixed all these cracks in the earth that Lex Luthor caused. Now, in that matter, Lex Luthor was a threat, but as just a villain, he wasn't that big of a threat physically, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And much of Superman's villains are physically a threat to him, but Lex Luthor really wasn't. Although an amazing portrayal from the actor, his character just wasn't that well written. Of course, it was still semi a challenge for Superman to be like putting the earth back together, basically, and at one point, Lois did basically die, as we get the infamous scene of Superman screaming with Lois's presumed lifeless body on the floor, and then he goes around the earth circling it and reverses time, reverses all the damage, reverses what happens to Lois, and basically that's the ending. And he has a happy ending, basically. Now, as a final act, this was still a very entertaining final act. There was stakes, As a first-time Superman viewer, I didn't know if Lois was gonna live or die, and that definitely kept me at the edge of my seat, and I love suspense in movies, especially in movies where you could probably predict the ending. With Superman, you should be able to predict the ending, but with this, you were not, because this was the first ever movie, and before this, it was basically comics. So anybody watching this, they could do anything, basically, anything that they wanted, as long as they stick with the lore that was previously given. But we've seen comic book movies where they stick to the lore, but they change certain things, like they have little tweaks and stuff. But still, overall, a phenomenal movie. This easily does get a 10 out of 10, and I'm really glad I'm getting to watch and review this franchise. But that was just my opinion on this first Superman movie. Stay tuned for my reviews on the rest of the Superman movies leading up to the new Superman movie, and then I'll be doing a spoiler review on that once that comes out. But yeah, until then, stay tuned, and yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next Superman review.